to tasting.
Panel members, come up, please. Panel members, come up, please. Including the moderator. Bengu. Me? Dude, no, man.
I'll check just now. Not check my emails.
How was lunch? How are you, sir? Good to meet you again.
Nice to
Good
see
to see
you.
you again. How are you, sir?
you?
Good to see you again.
Just very sure.
Of course they are.
Not shaking
Did you
hands,
hear
sir.
that? Did you hear that, Prof G? Did you hear that question?
What did he ask you?
It's a typical scout question.
What did he ask you?
Just to make sure there's no wine for us in the bags.
Censor.
Hello, colleagues. Welcome back. It's been a great lunch. I had 2 burgers. Who had more than me? Who had more than 2 burgers? Be honest. Because I waited for my second burger a long time. So, I would have been if I didn't have my second burger. Hello, colleagues. We are back. We are live. Mr. Walter Bengu, there's 1 extra seat here. That's for you. We can't proceed without your presence, so please. Must say it's an absolute pleasure working with you guys. Time here is at all not a problem. So I think that is something all of you can actually be very proud of. There are very few, if ever there are any conferences that despite starting after time or even starting on time or worse, starting before time that overrun. There are very few conferences that have managed time the way you have managed time. I'm not the one who manages time, it's you, because I could stand here all day. If you guys are not in the room, there is no conference. So let's wake ourselves up as well. It's a graveyard shift. A round of applause for you on time. So what do we have here? A panel discussion on technology, public procurement, and innovation. And when you have good friends, you probably want to say something like this. This guy here, not only is he not even in the delegates list, he rocked up because I told him to, because I had the allure of Chris Eukins in the room, and he's probably here because he's here to meet Professor Chris Eukins. Fine. But what he did not know was he was going to end up moderating a panel discussion, which is supposed to be mine. But after asking some very intelligent questions, in particular around innovation and procurement and technology, I was minded to, as I did, pass the buck onto him and abuse the platform. Was he ever going to say no with me calling him up to the stage in front of all of you to moderate a session? And he say no and stay there. It was never going to happen. So that's why he's here. His name is Mr. Walter Bengu, who is the latest recruit at the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. He's a lawyer by profession and is a great, great friend of mine. So thank you, Mr. Walter Bengu, for engaging and indulging us for this session, a very important one on technology, public procurement, and innovation. And I'm glad to see technology and innovation there, because oftentimes innovation is seen as no more than just technology, whereas technology is a component of innovation, if you like. So Mr. Jacket, Mr. Human, Dr. Ramsaran, and Dr. Moseya are on the stage to engage these. Bengu, you have one instruction and one instruction only. Make sure they nearly box, because we want a heated discussion and debate, but they must not box. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Bengu, you've got until 3:05. Okay.
I don't know how to yeah.
And I do apologize for sleeping on the job. I really do apologize. It absolutely is my fault. All these microphones were here for some reason. The penny did not drop that these were the actual microphones needed for the panel members. So everything that you are seeing on stage now is all on me. And I'm glad the camera is focused on me. I don't want the folks at home to also now see what's going on. But to cut a long story short, I'm just going to try and find the time now to read the respective biographies of the panel members who will be taking to the stage now with Walter Bengu. Mr. Elaine Jacket, Director, SABEX, an Institution of Civil Engineers, ICE, and is the country representative for South Africa. He's the one who is recognized as the first speaker there. Mr. Skalk Human, if I can just find his profile, Chief Procurement Officer, South African Revenue Service. He is also on stage. And then you have Dr. Ramusaran, Manager, Innovation for Inclusive Development, Technology Innovation Agency of South Africa. Thank you so much, Doc. And the other Doc, Dr. Moseya, is also on stage. He's the Director for Science Technology for Sustainable Human Settlements, Department of Science and Innovation in the country. Doc, thanks to you as well. And you all know this bloke in the gray suit. You all know who he is. Is everybody mic'd up? Yes? Thanks, Walter.
Okay. Now, thank you very much. Are you ready to make a presentation? So we're going to start off with a brief presentation, which is going to set the tone for this particular panel discussion. But welcome to all of you, and let's have a boxing match, as it were.
Right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being back after lunch, as we've been coaxed into being here on time. I'm going to try and keep it very quick and brief. I've been asked just to speak a little bit about technology and public procurement innovation. How do we mix the two of these, which seem to have very, very vast dichotomies? So in such a company, I'm very humbled to be able to present and just get the discussion going. And that is the purpose of what my presentation is today. I always start off with trying to get a common base and indicate that procurement is a process. The ISO standards define procurement as the process that creates, manages, and fulfills contracts. And this implies that there must be a series of logical steps that must be performed to deliver a contract. It starts off in your planning phase. It continues through your acquisition phase, which is what most procurement people focus on. But it then extends also to the contract management phase. Processes, procurement, processes, procedures, and methods can therefore be clearly identified and systemized. So let's just go back a little bit in history. How did it all work? Because if we're talking about innovation, we're talking about something that started many, many, many years ago. So I'm not going to go all the way back to the to when we invented fire or the wheel. We'll just go back about 25 years when I started with the procurement industry. We started off with preparing procurement documents by using standard forms that were housed in pigeonholes. We collected one of those, one of those, one of those. We added those to a pile of technical specifications. We then headed off to the print room and they got copied before they were advertised in the newspapers. That was the most prominent way of finding out where there was a procurement opportunity or a tender opportunity. Printed documents were then handed out to people who came to collect them. Tenderers had to submit their hard copies into those big wooden boxes that never fitted because you had 3 lever arch files because you had to provide 3 copies. I see a couple of nods. Okay, we've been there. This is a bit of history. But let's have a look at how innovation has already transformed our industry today. All right. The other activities that we had to do in the background was we had to produce the procurement documents. We had to prepare the tender documents. That was done quite innovatively with something called WordPerfect or Microsoft Word for those really rich organizations that could afford that. Cut and paste involved scissors and glue and a red pen to make changes. This is what we used to do. Compulsory briefing sessions were held for just about every tender, not because we wanted to impart certain site information or specific information, but it was more to collect the names and contact details of the people who are interested in the document so that you can now issue addenda to them. The attendance register was crucial. Addenda were issued by means of that thing, it's called a fax machine. Trying to get a message through to a whole long list of people with a fax machine. Technology was starting to come into play here. The fax number couldn't be read on the attendance register, so it didn't go through. Then you had to phone up the person to say what was the number and did you get the addendum? That was a little bit of PT and hard work. Tender queries were handled by telephone. There were no records of conversations that were held. The employer published the tenders that were received and the contracts that were awarded in the government tender bulletin. That was sent out every week by post. I'm just pausing there because a lot of these initial basic technologies don't exist today. Fax machine is gone. The postal service, I'll stop there. Okay. We have certainly evolved in terms of our ability to communicate and deliver our procurement processes. are activities that create, manage, and fulfill contracts. So let's have a look a little bit into how public procurement has worked. Manual paper-based public procurement has a reputation for being inefficient, corrupt, and very wasteful. So where money, power, and discretion come together in government, making it government's #1 corruption risk. We've identified all of these challenges, not only in South Africa, but around the world. Digitizing this entire procurement process through an e-procurement system has the promise of transforming procurement to be a more efficient, effective, and accountable process. We're evolving. It's not a complete revolution, as you indicated earlier today. It's an evolution. The future of e-procurement must lie in harnessing the power of technology, electronic platforms, and broaden the accessibility of tender opportunities to reach more providers and to more effectively manage and administer that procurement process. So, the advent of e-procurement. There's a lot of discussion around e-procurement and e-governance, but let's just define what I found a definition for e-procurement that I found was quite interesting. So if you'll bear with me while I read out the definition. Electronic procurement or e-procurement defines the automation of procurement and supply chain processes using internet-based applications and technology. This expands the concept of ERP systems to further automate internal business processes, providing a platform that supports automation with parties outside of the implementing organization. It allows parties to communicate information simply and efficiently, extending the reach to the global community, reducing time and costs without compromising on standards and quality. The value of e-procurement has been very well documented, and it's recognized by governments and public sector institutions. These organizations have basically highlighted a number of important benefits. Tender notices, contract award notices, and online bid filing have resulted in increased transparency. Again, that starts to combat fraud and corruption. Greater bidder participation as a result of increased awareness and access to opportunities. You're now accessing more and more suppliers and providers to make it more competitive. There are savings on procurement costs due to reduced bid prices as a result of more open and competitive bidding. Improvements in procurement reporting and analytics will closely monitor your procurement processes, making it transparent. The way procurement tasks were done have been sped up now by the online workflows. We don't have to sit in front of a fax machine for hours trying to get the addendum out. We can press a button and it's done. It's strengthened capabilities for combating fraud and corruption, and it's reduced printing, distribution, and storage of paper documentation, so we are becoming more eco-friendly as well. A study that was dated in 2021 indicated that 14 countries in Africa, specifically because our conference is talking about procurement in Africa, I focused on this one. 14 countries in Africa had already begun implementing statewide e-procurement systems. It's extracted from a paper in 2021, illustrating that governments across Africa have already recognized the need to address the challenges of fraud, corruption, mismanagement, and inefficiencies that plague our procurement processes. We know that South Africa is on the process of doing this, and again, it's an evolution because we are doing it, but not all in one go. The first steps towards fully fledged e-procurement processes and e-governance has already taken place. We already have a lot of mechanisms that make our procurement processes more efficient. We've got document templates that are prepared by seasoned professionals with certain options where things need to be filled in to make them procurement specific. That makes it quicker and easier to prepare your procurement documentation, and the quality of the documentation is also improved. Tenders are advertised on websites, government websites, as well as the e-tender or CIDB iTender platforms. Documentation can be downloaded by tenderers and viewed electronically without having to travel across the country to collect the documents or to actually make payment for those documents. Briefing sessions are now held online, like we're doing today. Tenderers don't need to travel across the country to visit a tender briefing. We are making it a lot more user-friendly, a lot cheaper to participate in the processes and to proceed with the process. There are platforms available, such as our platform that we have developed, that provide a full e-procurement functionality. We can harness it to everyone's benefit very, very quickly and easily. We can advertise tender opportunities. We can publish procurement documents for free downloads. We can have open tenders, invited tenders, or even anonymous tender processes where you only know who is coming, who is going to be awarded the contract at the end. Publication of documentation of addenda, all of the processes we've indicated earlier today are now automated and available for free. Further innovation into e-procurement may entail other mechanisms. We've discussed a couple of those already today, and that is probably the subject of our discussion. Where do we use artificial intelligence? Where do we use the data that we've gathered to improve our procurement processes, our documentation? How are we going to incorporate machine-readable standards into our documentation? Where do we go to from here? So that was my challenge, to pose a couple of questions and to set the scene. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I must say I've not heard the word perfect in a very long time. So thank you for taking us down memory lane. It is much appreciated. And I think this conversation comes at the right time. And I'm going to jump straight into it because I see the panel, is people are big experts in technology and innovation. So I'm quite interested to get those. So the first one, and I'm going to pose it to you since you just came off the podium, is how quickly and how well do you think we can do the digitization of the documents that are currently in paper form? So in municipalities, for instance, there is historical documentation that might be needed to consider a particular tender, for instance, but it's in paper form, and we're trying to move towards digitization. I mean, how easy do you think that's going to be in a country as vast as ours?
I think the challenge in having paper formats historically is that we now don't have all that information digitally available to search for it.
Yeah.
So we can use those previous documents, but we have to rely on the people who prepared them and the knowledge in their heads to be able to identify which documents we should digitize, which ones were good, which ones worked, and which didn't. We can then scan them and make them available or retype them if we need to in Word.
Yes.
But that is possibly the way we need to go forward. Historically, we have a backlog, and we have to then go the digitization route to try and get that to a mechanism where we can have it accessible.
And Mr. Skalk-Human, jumping to you next. I met him in a different capacity, and we were on opposite ends. He was at National Treasury, I was at the Auditor General, and we were having quite a nice, fiery debate at the time, and I'm glad that you're still within the procurement space. My question to you relates to the fact that we now use electronic portals for people to submit their tenders. So as a chief procurement officer, do you think that having a website option or a portal, as it were, will not be a hindrance for small companies that might not be able to, one, have stable internet for them to upload all the documents that are required, let alone then track what needs to be done after the fact.
First of all, I did go for therapy after the encounter with the Auditor General. And I just want to make sure if I'm audible at the end of the. No,
Thanks for being online.
Thanks.
Testing 1, 2. The advent of digital and electronic means have the power for lack of a better word, crowdsourcing, providing opportunities to so many service providers. But the reality of our digital divide is that we have bandwidth, spectrum, and connectivity issues. So did I mention ESCOM, just for fun? No digital system without electricity is workable. And that brings in a huge amount of challenges to organizations that hold fair competition in high regard. So I would caution that unless adequate backup systems, failovers, and centers that provide technical support for small emerging firms are put in place, that we see this as a magic wand that solves our problems. Digital and e-procurement remains a means to an end. The intelligence of the category strategy, the market analysis, and how we harness these technologies to have a good responsive bid still remains the core of smart e-procurement. And I'm sometimes worried that we think e-procurement is a solution. E-procurement, when it's dished up as a workflow, is essentially computerized paper processes. So ERPs that major in PDFs is not useful because it still needs interpretation. It still needs judgment. And unless we change the e-procurement debate to a data blueprint and data standards that, to your point, is machine readable, there's almost no benefit in e-procurement. In fact, we make the same mistakes just faster if it's a workflow. So yes, we are all concerned about small companies with limited access, but we feel we have made huge progress in the last 5 years to cross that bridge. And at least in the organizations that I've served in the last few years, we've seen a huge penetration and uptake of smaller companies. And we find that encouraging. Thank you.
No, thanks. And obviously, after speaking, you can switch off your mic so that there's no feedback. But Doc, I can call you Doc, I hope.
You can call me Anita.
I can call you Anita. Oh, wow, that's it's rare to have a doctor not want to be called a doctor, eh? So, no, much appreciated for that. It's all about inclusive development, as it were, as your title says. The question I've posed to Schalk Schoeman is the same to you, to say, as someone who looks at innovation, inclusive development alike, how do you see the aspect of accessibility for those who have been shut out of the economy, for instance, to be able to be put into this particular technology revolution, as it were?
Okay, I want to start from a different, I want to change your question.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Sure.
Because I think we're coming from the other end, myself and Dr. Mosea.
Yes.
We're coming from the end where we're supporting innovators to develop solutions for government. Right, so how do we get them into your procurement system? That is our challenge, right? So we have innovators that are looking at service delivery challenges. They have solutions, right? When they go to a municipality or a government department, they send back because they got to fill in the tender document, which they have no idea how to do. They got to, there's a whole list of requirements for them. Then when we look at, so the department has done, they do this annual survey on the science and innovation activities of government department. and billions of rands are spent on science and innovation activities by government departments, yet those services are not procured locally. Right. So if I take the SAPS for an example, the SAPS, if I'm not mistaken, spends about 20 billion rands on science and technology activities for their work, but they haven't been procuring these services in the main locally. So the interventions that we put in place are at different levels. One is to say, how can we as a government, that is science and innovation, how could we be the first customer for innovative solutions that are developed, novel solutions that are not developed anywhere else? How could we be the first procurer of that technology? So we've developed with the assistance of the Department of Science and Innovation, a fund called the Technology Acquisition and Deployment Fund. So the intent behind this is when a technology has reached a particular level of readiness, how do we purchase 20, 30 samples of the technology, identify a government department that could make use of that technology and could pilot the deployment of the technology, and in the process, convince at the level of procurement and regulations, how do we convince procurement departments, procurement forums, the National Treasury? I'm not too sure who's sitting here. I'm saying that very quietly because I'm going to present something else later. But how do we convince them to start taking up locally developed technologies, which has come through a cabinet resolution of 2016, where government departments have been mandated to procure locally. So coming back to the question now, and how does it apply? So we have in our pool of innovators a number of innovators that are community-based innovators who may not have the advantages of accessing a procurement system, connectivity issues, load shedding issues. So we have centers that we need to create where they can access connectivity, electricity, etc. But from my experience of being in tender processes as a part of the procurement system for government, is that there is still a lot of education and awareness that needs to go into it. We've rejected applications because they can't fill in a simple document, or they don't provide the mandatory documents. So things like that. So what we have is, if you don't know, and generally our innovators would not know these things, there's a lot of education that needs to go at that level of ground. But I think we still must, in this conference, Prof, we must come back to look at the issue of how do we bring innovation, locally developed innovation, into our procurement system. That is our challenge. We had some success with the city of Joburg. They've taken on a technology to pilot, and then they would look at an offtake agreement to purchase the technology. We've got some success with City of Tshwane and eThekwini. We've got some successes there. But I think for local municipalities, district municipalities, they have need for these innovations. How do we change our processes, keep to the principles of fairness, transparency, etc., but also how do we bring in locally developed technologies into the government space?
Thanks for taking the conversation there. And I think during the break, we spoke about how most of the innovative procurement that we've seen over the ages has been driven by the state itself, but particularly defense, right? So defense invests in a particular space, and then ultimately that particular product or commodity or service, whatever the case may be, then filters into mainstream as opposed to the other way around. And I think, Doc, I like saying Doc. I don't know if you mind as well. Is that fine? You can use it as well. Is to say, when you speak about human settlements, right, and the legacy issues that come with human settlements and spatial planning and the like, and then a few years back, the president speaking about a smart city, for instance, right? My question to you, and obviously dovetailing from what Anita has spoken about pushing innovators into spaces that they can develop certain things and supporting them, and then their work becomes more mainstream after that. Is there hope for a smart city in the next 5 years?
Right, I hope I'm audible enough. technical system of
I think it's quite important to be able to articulate what has been done, because I think a lot of people have been focusing on the smart city that's supposed to be, for instance, in Ekurhuleni, I think, for an example. So thanks for that. And Alan, you know, as part of this ecosystem that Doc has just articulated to you, I just wanted to zoom back to two things. And from your perspective, from an engineering perspective, right, is to say, is the policy right now, is a policy environment conducive for you as engineers, as an example, to be able to partake in these procurement innovations that are currently happening within the country? And secondly, engineers are known to be great project managers, right? And I think we've seen a lot of systemic failures in public procurement because of a lack of project management. How best can we elevate this particular skill set so that at least all procurement practitioners can also understand the importance of project management in whatever they do?
I think that that question revolves back to what the definition of procurement is, because it stems from the policy of what you're going to procure, how you're going to procure it, and the structure of it. It stems through to the procurement processes and procedures that you use to get the best value out of whatever it is you're looking for. That's the acquisition phase. And then importantly, and that is what has been forgotten, is that there is part of the delivery of a project is the actual contract management and administration. All of this requires technical skills in each of those particular areas. And the best way of using it is to learn what we did through COVID. We can learn remotely. We can learn on our couch. We can learn from TV. We can learn in various different mechanisms. And if we harness technology and innovation to bring that experienced lecturer into somebody's home so that you can learn sitting on your couch in your pajamas like you did in COVID, you can actually start imparting skills that would otherwise never been transmitted and transferred. We have people from all over the world watching this today, and we've had presenters from around the world with similar problems. We need to just share those same solutions that we found, share the skills and transfer that knowledge to whoever we can, who can listen. And if we can do it through technology, it's cheaper, it's better for the environment, it's better for our ecology. We need to harness this. Be innovative in how we upskill people. What are we going to look at? What are the skills that people need? Make it available. I think that's really the innovative part of technology. We can harness it in so many different ways that we've never even thought about yet.
And Skok, Alan has spoken about skills transfer, right? And as someone who's had more years of experience than I've been alive, I think it then becomes quite important for you to transfer those skills to me as quickly as you can. But my question to you is that SARS has been seen as being one of the organizations at the forefront of technological development as it relates to tax collection, right? So the use of e-filing, for instance, has been absolutely amazing. And now the use of AI, for instance, in tax administration. So do you believe there is now fertile ground for an institution as big as yours, for an example, to then push for such AI technology within the procurement space in what you're procuring yourselves, and then opening up more time for yourself to do skills transfer? Because I think sometimes we can all agree, procurement takes up so much time because there's so many boxes to tick and so many things to do that learning new skills becomes very difficult. So if we can eliminate some of the mundane tasks to artificial intelligence and then to the skills transfer that is required, that would be great. So in your experience, do you think that there's opportunities for AI within supply chain and procurement, and will that then open up spaces for skills transfer to pivot from what Alan has said? Yeah.
Absolutely. As a person speaking from the previous millennium, I can vividly remember the first tender that I was involved in. They brought the paper in with a forklift. It was an immense amount of paper. But more on a serious note, at SARS, the experiences with machine learning, blockchains, artificial intelligence, and is all data points that help you to manage risk and to put effort to a yield that will have a good return. And I think the same applies in the procurement space, except that I wonder if the experiences that was appropriate maybe in 90s and early 2000s is relevant at all. In public procurement, one of the things that I'm most worried is that we are majoring in administration and that we are so concerned with the compliance burden and the completeness of this form and that form that we more or less miss the gist of it, the essentials. I wonder if we shouldn't take a radical view and overall the whole thinking about e-procurement and rather transform to a marketplace. Changing a demand policy approach where a department or an entity must formulate a spec and hope and pray they have it all figured out for a market to respond, and change it to a supply side policy. Let innovators publish on the marketplace what's available, and that will mean a different kind of skill set. It means that we must move away from the old so-called expenditure management mindset, where finance and procurement people manage expenditure, to an investment mindset, or so-called finance management orientation. What investment will I make by buying, I don't even want to call it procuring, offering on the marketplace that's innovative? And you need to overlay that with professionalization. We are venturing in judgment and not rules. So why are we so conservative? Because we do not want to venture outside of the ambit of the rule. But we very well know in our gut, our judgment, what is the right thing to do. So upskilling and reskilling, I think, needs a total reset in this country. And that in public procurement, the drive for professionalization needs a policy kick in the teeth. That I just say that it's a Pretoria North expression that most of you won't recognize, but maybe in this environment it would rather translate in compulsory professional status for public procurement official, a change in policy, and a definition of a competency framework that speaks to a digital procurement environment. In conclusion, the digitization is not the buying of the software. It's a revamp of a policy, a view of procurement, and skills that will make this relevant and take us forward. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I needed to come to you, also dovetailing towards Skalkuman has just spoken about in terms of the conservative approach, right? And innovation will never thrive in a conservative environment, in my view. And please let me know if you disagree with that, because that's what panel is about. So I want to get your insights as someone who works in innovation, right? how have you jumped through those barriers of a conservative way of thinking, conservative approach, because you say you work with innovators and then try and plug them in. But secondly, innovation from a technology perspective, the initial capital expenditure is quite high. So, I mean, when you talk about some of the books that we read in the early 90s about expenditure on technology, they say the initial capital outlay of technology is expensive, but you reap the benefits further down the line. So how do you then, we say SAPS has spent about 20 billion, for instance, in some of the work that they're doing. How do you help motivate for this type of initial capital expenditure in a time where we're trying to tighten our belts?
Yeah. So I think, let me just haven't introduced the agency, TIA, Technology Innovation Agency. It has been set up by the state to facilitate the exploitation of technologies into the market. Right. So it does provide what we call patient capital. So we would receive not too much of money. We could do with more. So annually, we would receive about 500 million from the TSI through the vote process, and that is to invest in technologies, high risk technologies where no other institution will want to invest. There is no bank. There is no one would want to invest in this. With regards to inclusive innovation, we play even at a lower stage where we are actually also investing in ideas. So we will invest in ideas even though there's no proof of concept, because our role is to democratize innovation and provide innovation for communities, innovators that have no access to a CSR or an NRF where these research and development happens. So we have to depend on the state for that funding. The funding is too little. The ministers, this appears in all the budget speeches. We want to reach 1.5% of GDP. We've not even 1% of GDP for innovation, science and innovation activities to promote innovation and to facilitate innovation. So coming to the question, and I like the suggestion of the marketplace. I hope that can happen, because this now gives our innovators an opportunity to put out their solutions there. And it depends, it'll depend on demand. So I can go and shop around for the solution I want. I think, but also I think what is critical from the perspective of a municipality or a government department or the institution requiring the services is to, in the specifications, is to bed down the specifications clearly enough so that innovators can actually attempt to meet those specifications. And there's institutions like TIA that will assist them in meeting the specifications. So if it requires a particular standard or particular regulatory process, we could assist with them meeting that. So I think coming back to your question, which was about how would our innovators actually benefit? Definitely with the suggestion of a marketplace, but definitely there isn't much work that entities like us need to do. CEDA is another institution that provides business skills to assist innovators. So it's institutions like this that will support not only the innovation, but also support the jockey. We need to skill the innovator as well in this process.
Thanks for that. It's great that you also unpacked what TIA is all about, because it helps. Because we're about to go into questions now, because I don't want to be the only one asking questions here. But one final question to you. So sustainability, sustainable procurement, those are the buzzwords now, right? And I think last week the Financial Times was saying that we failed in the last decade as the world in terms of really pushing sustainability in the way it was supposed to be. So I just want to find out from you is to say that what is the appetite for sustainability, but also how can you debunk that the cost is not too high to push sustainability projects? Because obviously when we talk about procurement as an example, a lot of times there's always that talk to say, companies, put a premium on some of the quotations because they're like, I'm bidding with the state. So my question to you is to say, you know, sustainability, is it a success? Can we look forward to better sustainable procurement? And how do we debunk the cost argument to say it's not cost effective? Then I'll open up to everyone after this.
I think the issue of sustainability affects us all, so I'm not going to make a case for sustainability. We all know what the challenges are from an income, from a household income point of view versus fuel or energy or climate change, like I've mentioned earlier. So the case is obvious. But I think perhaps the question is broader than that. Instead of looking at what are the costs and whether to have options to transition, we don't have many options. We have to transition. But the debate, instead of maybe us talking about the cost and benefits analysis of, you know, what are the trade-offs, the discussion should be about procurement as a policy instrument for transition. If that's the case, in a decade ago, the emphasis was more on research and development and also on building national systems of innovations. But the emerging innovation policy dialogue is around transformation, using innovation policy as a tool for transformation. If that's the case, then we should be asking a question whether procurement policy is a policy instrument for transformation. In my presentation, I will say yes, it is. So now we are to engage with procurement practitioners in different levels of discussion, because one could be to look at how do we innovate procurement policies, which is one part of the discussion, but the other one is how do you use procurement to enable innovation. Because if we are able to get functional procurement practices in place, that is going to increase a number of innovations that come through for particular social problems. So because we're no longer setting specification around a product, I think another gentleman mentioned this earlier, where most of our procurement practices right now are product specification. So whereas procurement is context specific, problem specific, geography and location bound. So if you are able to get to practices of procurement where we call for functional procurement specifications, we don't know what the solution is, but we know the solution should do 1, 2, 3. Therefore, we will be taking the debate one level up, because we'll be addressing the very same problem of how to use innovation to achieve sustainability. But it's all connected. I think the place and geography and innovation, and then the debate earlier on about local technologies, because we can talk about procuring innovations, but you should be procuring innovations also that are local, because they should be context specific. So yes, indeed, we need an enabling environment to use procurement to procure these innovations. But what are those conditions? What are these precedent conditions that we spoke about yesterday, from a finance, from a skills, from a governance point of view, from an infrastructure and platforms, and from policy and regulatory frameworks? What are these things that must be in place so that we achieve sustainability and transition to sustainability using innovation, but using procurement, because procurement is a tool that we can use to use innovation to transition.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And I like how it keeps tying it back to procurement. That's very important. I'm going to ask for 3 hands for anyone from the audience to ask questions. I see one hand shot up very quickly. So I'll start with you, Prof, at the front. You'll be second right there at the back. Third, fourth, and I'll use my discretion as the moderator to make it 5. Remember your number, I'll just call it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that's it. Number 1.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for a great panel. So I have a number of questions, but I'll just ask one for Anita.
from your point of view, what is the main block apart from the incapacity of the innovators, of the suppliers? What is the main block that prevents offtake of local technology after a pilot, for instance? What would you say is that thing that we need to get rid of that will make this offtake happen?
Please note your questions. I can answer them once. Two, you notice that?
So thank you very much. Very entertaining conversation. My name is Mark Britz. I am sitting on the board of the National Research Foundation, and I also sit on the board procurement committee. So the comments I'm making are mine, not that of the National Research Foundation. So what I wanted to ask from you is, what are your thoughts on adopting existing innovation for government, such as a smart contract platform using distributed ledger technology, a central bank digital currency and stable coins that would be applied to the procurement process so that budgets can be narrowed down to, in actual fact, the expenditure that they're designed to be spent on. And this entire process would enable perhaps the Auditor General, National Treasury to have better control over budget expenditure. There's also an element of the Internet of Things, which would be able to track and monitor movements of goods and services, even right the way down to vehicles and government. And the last one would be adopting digital identity, which we already have, to make sure that fraud, etc., is mitigated to a certain extent. Have you given some thought to that? And where are those conversations taking place, if there are? Thank you.
I think I'm for my question to Mr. Human. What regulatory reforms will he suggest that will take us to this ideal of a marketplace? Unless he thinks the current constraints are an issue of mindset and skill. If that is the case, what would be assisting us from a regulatory point of view to do that? But if I understood it differently, then the question would be, what regulatory reforms will he suggest in the current reform process?
Yeah. Okay, it's Stellenbosch. I'm having a question and a comment, right? To Anita, I think it's a good thing that we are doing on the technology fund. It's by itself very innovative, but the issue here is that innovation by itself, it's novelty, right? And novelty, it's also an intellectual property right. So by itself is monopolistic because it needs to be protected. Now, how is that going to be procured in a public procurement system that requires it to be competitive? How do we deal with the trade-off embedded in the fact that novelty it's protected? So in the EU, for instance, they issued directive that the owner should be the successful bidder, not the state. But obviously, I mean, we have challenges in this country of competition and so forth. The other one, it's a comment on me. I mean, the public procurement system doesn't allow for the procurement of innovative products because it's a competitive bidding system. And if you are to procure innovative products, not only ICT, those are risky. There are failures. We don't have appetite for failure. How do we move ahead in the future? Even the public procurement bill is not clear on how innovative products are going to be procured. It only mentions innovation, but we don't have a framework as a country to procure innovative products. Thanks.
Thank you, Walter. It's a question from one of the online participants, Eric, and he's asking the question, why is it so difficult for government to procure and implement a full function ERP system?
There's only one person on the panel who can answer it, and it's not me. But please, you can answer. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I want to start off with an earlier question, which I now remember that I didn't respond to. And the question you asked about why is the innovation so expensive during the development? So innovation is expensive during the development. A prototype is expensive because you're experimenting. But once you scale and manufacture more units, then you bring down the cost. So it's not necessarily the price you'll take to market. So the price of prototyping is different from the price you'll take to market. But the question that you asked about what is the difficulty? So the difficulty is that how does the municipality procure from one supplier, which is what Tobacco raised as well. How do we, there's no framework for that. How do they procure? And what is it that we are intervening, or what do we do? What do we need to do as government? Is that we needed to find an instrument, right, where we would procure. And we would show the municipality, the government department, the success through the piloting process so that the government department can now procure. And that is exactly the way we've designed the TADF. The other issues regarding deployment is that municipalities have these certain specifications, and even within our own organizations, and I must say, even within TIA, we would be hesitant to procure from the very innovators we support. Even though we believe very strongly in the technology and we believe it will work, but there's always that barrier that we wouldn't trust it. It won't be reliable. It could fail. Right. And early on, I was having a discussion with the lady from the Department of Health, and she says, if it's about lives, would you want to take a risk on an SMME with no credible track record of delivering these services? So we are dealing with those kinds of situations. Unless we intervene and provide support, these innovators are not going to get anywhere. They're not going to get into. They've recognized problems. They've come up with solutions, but they're not going to be able to access the markets that they have. So I think I've responded to those questions that they asked. Yeah, sure.
Thank you, ma'am. I've got three initial thoughts on a regulatory framework that will be conducive for buying innovation. A framework of targeted procurement, not apologizing for buying innovation. Secondly, a concept of seeding money. We are held hostage by the concept of fruitless and wasteful expenditure and irregular expenditure. Innovation can only flourish when we up our risk appetite and that we adopt a different framework. Thirdly, panels where we have expressions of interest and we commission innovation, where we have a fair, open, transparent process of calling innovators and then commissioning certain pieces of innovation. And then lastly, adopting a concept in government of reselling and distributorship. So you buy the IP, but you on-sell to the other 1,200 entities in government where applicable. And we should not be naive. Buying innovation is not another form of a grant or a subsidy. The commercials must make sense. It must be beneficial to those who we serve, and we do serve the broader constituency. So I would suggest that a regulatory framework that has those elements with enabling those procurement methods with sound commercial acumen would probably be most conducive for this kind of environment. To do it within the current framework is possible, but you need to pray and you need to have good life insurance, is my advice. There was also other trick question about why is it so difficult to buy ERPs? Because we struggle to specify what we don't know, and therefore we default to the historic known, and we paint ourselves in a vanilla corner, while we're actually more interested in a blueberry flavor.
Thanks for that. And I think it dovetails to your comment at the back when you spoke about Internet of Things, smart contracts, and I like to say, we've got all these ideas, but because of what Scott just said, we are now hamstrung, and that's why the ERP. That's why I laughed when you talked about the ERP. I know that very well. It's quite a contentious one, but also with regards to intellectual property that you had raised there as well. I think Anita had spoken about the patent sort of fund of some sort that is there to assist. But I think there's still a lot that still needs to be looked into in how to make sure that, you know, even with such with the advent of monopolistic types of thinking, because I mean, if it's your product, you're not going to want anyone else to create it generic. How do we ensure that we still meet the 5 principles of public procurement? So I thought I must answer that to close off this session, because the next session has to start shortly. But thank you very much to the panel. It was an interesting debate, and I think even during the break, please make sure that you attack them and ask them as many questions as possible. But thank you very much. Thanks.
Walter Bengu, you have done well, as has your panel. Professor Gio Kino, you know what to do with those wonderful packages. And Skulk, sorry, Doc. Where are you rushing to? And so, Walter, you did a sterling job on the fly, ambushed as that was. One would never know if they did not know. So thank you very much to you for that. I was hoping to have the camera person ready for the photographs, but it seems like the very panel that was to be photographed is off the stage. But nonetheless, let's continue, ladies and gentlemen. We will take a very short break now. So let's go for a 5-minute break. I mean, okay, Prof. Gio insists on a 10-minute break. I don't know how long it takes for him to have coffee, but Prof. Gio has 10 minutes for coffee. So let's start the next session, please, at 25 to 16. The time now is 15:25 or 15:22 actually. So the next session, we're starting speeches going at 15:35. So we'll only eat 5 minutes into the next session, and he is hoping that that is also acceptable to those attendees on the virtual platform. Thank you very much, everybody. That was a thought-provoking session, well moderated as well, Bengu. Much appreciated.
I see today you released my friend.
Who?
My friend.
Oh. Hey, corruption in public procurement.
It's tough. It's very, very tough.
Aye, but you see the issue is that the most big players get the politicians themselves. Very
What?
few. The big players get the politicians.
Oh, of course, yes. And what is painful, they are not part of these processes.
Eh,
1, 2, testing. 1, 2, testing. 1, 2. Yeah. 1, 2, testing. Must use the mics, not yeah. The sound is coming. You can put the batteries tomorrow. Yes, must use yeah. You use the new ones, then we use the mics, not yeah.
You see, these are very low. I know them, and
But the
especially
thing
if you're
is-
like here, because
see, the thing is, e-picker is in between. E-picker, the speakers are in between, so you can pick up. Even if you can hear those people like here.
but some people that will.
But
and
then
it's,
when we start, we say, "Can you please bring it close?" That's the only thing they have to bring it close. Because Lena is it's a mission and a half.
No, this one. If we use one, then the exchange.
That's why I'm saying what we can do is the person who's handling the session, we mic him with this. Okay, then the people they use this. The mic. It's on. Because I'm
1,
running.
2.
Hello.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Hello. Yeah, talk on that one.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
They have to bring it close, but we don't have a choice. Yeah, we don't have a choice. Because we're gonna have a problem tomorrow. Because you can see if someone is holding this, they are rubbing it like this. Yes, they are rubbing it like this. Because my thing is, if Wonke they had this, in the when I suggest that we hold what clipper one, they must just turn it on, off, on, off, on, off. If they want my clipper, then we can do that. As if they don't. But this is a plan. This is a plan B. Yes, plan. This one. This ones don't use. Just use this one for the person who's handling. Then use this mic for yeah. Tomorrow to be safe. Let's keep these three together. No, there's no panel, only two here.
Oh, you meet again. Oh, you're very organized. Eh? I love that.
Yeah, because I didn't have too much to say.
Makes you an academic. So you're very much in the right line.
Exactly.
Thank you. Excellent. This is going to be lovely. So, okay, oh yeah.
I love your little intros and everything and handouts into something like this episode.
Are we all here? Are we all here? I like that, Sean. Shall we continue with those who are in the room? We've lost our entire audience here, only half of it are here. Sean, what's going on? Where are the people?
It's a long day. And
I mean, I've told them to come in. Eh?
It's a long day. And something's coming out.
Apparently it's a long day and there's nice coffee outside. I don't want to say that too loud for those on the virtual platform.
Bless you.
Okay, colleagues, I am minded to continue because there will be a knock-on effect if we don't end appropriately on time. So let us start this session, please, if we can settle down. This is session 4, and Professor Lynch is on the platform. It's supposed to start at 16:30, I mean at 15:30, but we'll more than recover time. I'm not worried about that. The case for public procurement as an innovation policy tool. And I think this is now starting to come together with some of the many conversations in relation to what innovation can do and perhaps who ought to do what. Now we're getting strong into the systemic parts of this conversation where the role particularly lies to the fact that and to the extent that it impacts the government and setting the scene for what exactly we are trying to achieve with innovation in public procurement. This lecture, in part at least, will address some of those aspects. Professor Lynch, thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and an enormous thanks to Professor Kino, the University of Stellenbosch and the whole team there, and also the organising team as well, to get us here, and also, of course, to NRF. For the kind hosting and opportunity. It's an absolutely wonderful opportunity. It's actually my second day of presenting, so we had some discussion yesterday. I travelled from Cardiff in South Wales, which is in the United Kingdom. Wales is quite a small country, 3.1 million population, but we're doing some absolutely amazing things, which is putting us on the global map when it comes to public sector procurement. So I'm an academic professor in procurement, and I started my I didn't start off as an academic, I started off in practice. So it's by no coincidence that a lot of the work that I do is around engagement workshops and applying a lot of the theory and helping and supporting governments and public sector bodies to apply some of that learning and to improve what they're doing. So I want to share a few things with you today. I've put my little starter on because a lot to talk about, and it's a good afternoon. So I think first of all, let's just move on to the next one. So what you can see in that picture there is actually Cardiff University, Cardiff Business School. We've also just very recently, just over a year, opened an innovation campus. We believe we're the first university in the world, please challenge me on that one, to open an innovation campus, which is a social science park, where we bring together businesses who want to develop and grow their business through research and want to partner with us. And it's an absolutely fantastic building, as you can see, 6 floors, and that's the staircase you can see in front of you there. So just to give a little bit of introduction in the context here, I think, what is innovation? I think this labeling is quite an interesting one because it's a bit like sustainability. Do we need to spell it out, or shouldn't we be doing it anyway? Do we need to say that it's innovative, or isn't that just something that we do from one day to the next because we're continuously trying to improve what we do? So I think it's important for you to first of all think about it in your own situation and think about what you mean by innovation, about whether it's about incremental change and innovation, so I'm doing something a little bit different, a little bit new, or is it really something which is much more transformational, much more radical? And from the conversations that I'm hearing today, I'm really thinking that that's really where the space that we need to be going in rather than that. So I think without doubt, in terms of research, there's enough evidence to suggest, and I know that one of the professors here is about to challenge that a little bit later on, it's essential to promote economic growth and prosperity and to create employment opportunities. And I think those are really, I've picked this one because I think it's really important for South Africa in terms of the notes. When we think about understanding what innovation is and how it relates to public sector procurement, some of the obvious ways are that we would go through a normal tender process and we would be looking for something which is a little bit different, offers value for money, but meets the requirements of the normal tendering process. There's been quite a bit of mention already about SBR, Small Business Research Initiative funds, or sometimes is SBIR funds, so the other way around, but regardless of what it is, it's about investing into the supply market to build capacity, to develop knowledge, to hopefully supply much more innovative goods and services. And then something that we've talked about yesterday a little bit is something called challenge funds. So one of the big switches that we've seen in Wales is moving from procurement as a process. It's all about process and legislation to anybody that isn't in procurement. But actually, if we do procurement well, it's about delivering better outcomes. So really, the way we need to be thinking about procurement going forward is that we need to think about what we're trying to achieve, first of all, through procurement, and then think about the process that we need to be able to get us there. So I think when it comes to innovation, there's the procurement of innovative goods and services. And then the question you need to ask yourself is, do we then need to innovate the procurement process? So I think that's a really important distinction that you need to be making, because quite often in the literature I see them, the terms and the concepts really used interchangeably when actually they're quite different things. And which one comes first is out for debate here. And I think while the case study that I'm going to be presenting to you is an international study, I think that we learned an awful lot about innovation in the COVID pandemic. We certainly did in the UK, where we saw producers, distilleries making gin normally. Actually, nobody was buying any of their product, or they weren't able to make their product, and suddenly they're making hand sanitizer. You know, we saw the Royal Mint. We're having the Royal Mint only a few miles away from Cardiff University, which I'm sure many of you as government buyers would actually be buying some of the coinage from them as well, souvenirs, medals, and all sorts of other things from them. But really thinking about, actually, they were helping us to produce ventilators. So, you know, there was all sorts of repurposing going on during that COVID pandemic, and it made us think very differently about what we mean by innovation of procurement and procurement of innovation. So that's just a little bit about the context of Wales. I put you a little map in there because whenever I travel to academic conferences and say that I'm from Wales, everybody instantly says London. I'm about 200 miles from London, which I have to say on the grand scheme of South Africa is probably not very far for you, but it is for us. Our roads just aren't as great as yours, I have to say. It's been lovely having a run around on your roads. And I've put a little star to see, so you can see roughly where we are in the south. So Cardiff's a beautiful city if you ever get the chance to visit us. But I think that what's interesting about Cardiff, the United Nations quoted not so long ago that what Wales is doing today, the rest of the world will do tomorrow. That's quite a big thing to say, isn't it? And of course, you can imagine our ministers and our policymakers jumping up and down and using that quote at every opportunity. But we've got to think about why that is and what is it that they're doing differently. So hopefully I can elaborate a little bit on that as we go through. But one of the most recent initiatives is that we've launched an innovation strategy. So that's at the central level, that's released by government, and we now have a director of innovation at central government level. Okay, so that's fairly new. It took a long time as a consultation process, running lots of workshops, bringing various stakeholders in to think about what does innovation mean to you. And now the next stage, of course, will be thinking about how does that translate into public sector procurement. So this is a fairly new document. It's publicly available on the Welsh Government website. But the study that I want to focus on today is an international research study. When I heard about this conference, I thought, this is a fantastic platform to be able to share some of the insights that we had on one of our research studies. So I'm a member, so is Louise Knight here, and Andrea Petruccio. I don't know if he's online yet, but he's certainly joining us tomorrow. We're members of the organising committee for the International Research Study on Public Procurement. It's abbreviated as IRSP. We've got our own website and a little bit of information about the various activities and research that we've been leading through that. That photo was actually taken as a screenshot of our website. You might want to have a quick look at it at your own time. But what we do is we run practitioner-led workshops approximately every 2 years. And quite often, the founding members are Jan Telgen and Christine Harland. And they'll say, Jane, what is it that you think is the pressing issue? Because Wales have got this reputation for being so advanced in their thinking, particularly in the implementation. What is it that keeps people awake at night? What is it we need to be talking about? So at the moment, we're debating the one for next year, but I think we're pretty much there. But the one I'm going to talk about is when we looked at innovation and the role of innovation and the role of public sector procurement. So I'm going to share some insights on that one with you. So our study, first of all, looked at the connections between innovation, policy, whether there's a strategy, and some of the tools and mechanisms that are used across the world to be able to deliver such things. I've realized that I haven't got my glasses. I need to have my glasses on to be able to see what I'm talking about here. So bear with me one moment. So also what we looked at is, number one, how do we deliver innovation through procurement? But then what are our expectations in terms of suppliers and their ability to be able to innovate in terms of what they offer as well? The logos that you see at the bottom of the page were the sponsors of this particular workshop that was run just literally before we went into the pandemic. So it was quite interesting to see. It'd be really great to run this one again, actually, but we're not going to. Life moves on. This is the framework, but I was sat at the back there thinking they're never going to see that framework. So this is the framework that we put together. And initially, when we run an research workshop, it's usually over 2 or 3 days sometimes. And the first thing we do is we come out with a set of overarching questions. We design a survey. That survey goes out worldwide. And we use the results of that survey then to fine-tune, to go deep dive into what we want to explore in-person workshop, working with senior practitioners from across the globe. So in this particular instance, I've put it in simple terms here. The first question we were asking is there a government strategy or policy which mentions innovation? Okay, either mentions or is actually dedicated to innovation. And then what's more, what are the instruments that they're using, if at all? Okay, and then similarly, we then look at public procurement. Is there a public procurement strategy dedicated to innovation? What innovation means to public sector procurement, how you might deliver it, and is there a policy related to that? A question I was asked recently is, what's the difference between a strategy and a policy? It's a really great question, because it's actually one that we all think we know the answer to, but sometimes we don't like to ask that question. I'm just going to quickly go through that one. Generally, what you'll do is we need a roadmap, don't we? We can't, if I was going to travel out, I wouldn't know whether I was going to go the longest route, the shortest route, the prettiest route, or the fastest route, and they might be completely different. We all need a roadmap as an organization about what we want to try and achieve. And equally, as a nation, we need a strategy. If we haven't got a strategy, everything else will start to fall apart. That's when you start to see inconsistency, unreliability, people not really knowing what it is. I always refer to it as the North Star. This is what we're setting out to achieve. A strategy is no good without an action plan. Okay, so if you have a strategy, how are we going to deliver that action plan? What are the objectives that we're going to try and achieve here? So the strategy is what we're going to do and our ambition. Your action plan is how we're going to address that. Okay, so where does policy come into all of this? You are held to account in terms of your strategy, but not from a legislative point of view. When it comes to policy, a policy is something that you're mandated to do. So it hopefully has some relation to your strategy. At least your strategy should be looking at, first of all, what is the national strategy? Then how does public procurement fit into that strategy? And then what policies will help us to address that? As you're more than aware that UK went through the departure of the European Union, which I have to say publicly was a really, and still is a really great upset to me. Okay, but nevertheless, what happened is that we had to rewrite all of our legislation. What's happened as a result of that is the public procurement policy notices that are coming through have been coming through quite rapidly. It's made it exceptionally challenging for people working in procurement to keep up with them, to make sure. And just to give you an example of some of the policy notices that are coming through, they relate to cyber, they relate to risks, they relate to modern slavery, they relate to technology, they relate to supplier selection, those kind of things. Okay, risk is another one. So we looked at all of these things. We looked at public procurement, the process, and I think, and why I picked this one out, because I think this is quite relevant in terms of where we need to go when we think about innovation. We asked the question, because in the research it says that if you want to innovate, you need to collaborate. And to collaborate, you first need to think about internal collaboration. If you can get your internal collaboration right across departments, then you can start to collaborate more effectively externally in the supply market and beyond. So we were very interested in this particular area here. We were all obviously interested to understand what the challenges were and how we might overcome some of those challenges. So I'm going to share some of those insights with you. And finally, for our study, but I don't think it's necessarily relevant to share here, it's something that we'll be publishing at a later date. We then ranked each of the countries' responses in terms of where they were in their maturity in terms of innovation. So I think this is the basics of how we get started with innovation. So that's why I think I've put it here in hopefully in very simple terms. So in terms of this innovation workshop, which was run over 2.5 days, these were the countries that participated. There were 16 nations. So we had senior leaders from each of these nations. And as always we do, we mix them up. So we don't want to be seen to be, putting all certain continents by geography. We try and mix them up as much as we possibly can. And I think, and so in terms of developed versus less developed, but I think even in that, when it comes to understanding who's progressing, sometimes actually it isn't the most developed countries that are progressing. Sometimes it's actually the least developed. Okay, but they don't necessarily be aware of it or they don't label it in that way. So just a reminder of the topics we were looking at is we were looking at the policy, evidence of policy, the kind of instruments that we're using. We were then thinking about the specific examples of the project. We asked them to come with a case example. Do you know that was the thing that people struggled with most? Was coming out with a specific example about how they are complying with policy. So that's a really interesting point in itself. And then we looked at that cross-functional working and so on. So I think, so what I've done here in terms of the challenges, these are some of the challenges that we identified with innovation. I've split them roughly into buy side and supply side. There was actually a list about 5 times as long as this, but I've taken what I think are some of the key points and hopefully some of the ones that will be relevant to you. I think, first of all, there's a very high expectation that we're all doing amazing things, that we're applying innovation in its radical and transformational sense, but maybe there's no guidance to do that. So that was some of the frustrations that we were working through with some people, is that to be innovative, there needs to be an agility and there needs to be an element of freedom. Yet, of course, we all know traditionally that public procurement is actually quite a formal process, or at least it's perceived to be a formal process from outside of procurement. There's a perception that innovation is costly, because if we're going to buy something which is a little bit different, unique, then maybe there's, because of differentiation strategy, maybe there's a higher cost associated with it. So one of the things that we need to get over, of course, is this kind of short-term thinking. If we're always going to be thinking about the short-term budget constraints, we're never going to get to the bigger term picture. I'll come back to that point at the end. And of course, the big one here, and I'm sure that Professor Kino will be delighted to hear and relieved, is that there's a heavy reliance on lawyers. So that's never going to change. Okay. So, and I think this kind of, we've for so long, through our school education, going into our careers, everything's about doing things right. When you're innovating, it's quite experimental. And actually, it's okay for things not to go so well. There's still always going to be lessons learned that we can transfer and take forward. So I think those are really important lessons. And I think that one of the points they made was actually some of the funding that was available wasn't used enough. There was actually surplus funds available that people just weren't aware of. And so how can we stimulate that much more? How can we make sure that the supply market knows about these opportunities that are available to them? I think one of the challenges that procurement perceived for the supply market was it's very difficult. It's all very well saying we want you to be more innovative, but that's not a natural behavior to everybody. And so training up a supply chain can be very costly, and who bears the brunt of that cost? So I don't know how it is here with you, but with us, Department for Economy manage all of the supplier development training, and Department for Finance manage anything related to procurement. So I think that's a really important factor to consider. Who manages that cost? So what we need to see going forward is more integration between maybe some of that investment. So I think stakeholder conflict was a big one, and this kind of reliance on market intelligence and commercial acumen is going to be more and more important. As a procurement professional, are you necessarily aware of the market conditions unless you constantly engage and you have a team who constantly engage with the supply market? I've just taken out a few snippets of case findings from each country. I haven't noted every single country, but I'm just going to, I won't going to go through each one, but I'm just going to pull out some of the key findings. Nearly everybody had a strategy of some point, but not dedicated to innovation. So that was an interesting point. Now, if we run that study again, I know that myself and Andrea published a paper on the changing attitudes to policies post-COVID versus pre-COVID. And there was a lot more appetite to develop some guidance there post-COVID. So if we ran that again, that might be looking completely different. What was interesting is that when we looked at the specific examples, is that hardly any of them were related to a good or service. There was a medical example, there was a housing example, but actually in the majority of the cases, they were talking about innovation when they were talking about engaging with SMEs, engaging with micro firms, engaging with micro enterprises, engaging with ethnic communities. That's what they were talking about when they were talking about innovation. So that helps to stretch your mind in terms of what's possible. Then hopefully that's a bit of a help there. So I think that this is really important here. And I think this one, I'm just going to obviously focus on Wales because that's the one that's closest to me. For us, innovation is about being more ethical. It's about mitigating modern slavery. It's about fair work. But when I say fair work, I mean minimum wage isn't enough. Living wage is something that we look at in the UK. It's not just about our immediate contracting company. It's about whether they then apply those rules to their supply chain members as well. And that's when you start to really have an impact on SMEs, particularly the smaller business community and the micro firms. So I think this is a really important factor to think about. And in terms of the cross-functional working, this is only based on the cases that were presented, okay? So don't go saying, oh, this country doesn't do this, okay? But based on the countries, I'm just going to explain what I mean by no evidence at all, limited and high-level interdepartmental. Is that this interdepartmental internal collaboration piece seems to be the most difficult. Okay, so there was either no evidence of them doing it, it was all about procurement's responsibility, or no one did it. Or it was about collaboration externally with funders, with the supply market to better improve that. Actually, very few managed to think about the full internal and external collaboration opportunities that was meant to you. So I think, what does this research mean to you? I think that when we think about that procurement cycle that you're all familiar with, it's about identifying the need. It was interesting that when we asked them what drove them to innovation, is that the majority of them didn't say that it was procurement that initiated the innovation. It was because it was in a policy. Do we have to wait for a crisis, a pandemic, or a policy for us to work more innovatively? That's my question, really. Or is it something that we should be part of? How do you ensure that you're at the start of the conversation and not at the end, so that you're then being the ones who have to pick up the answer, the pieces at the end in the supply market? Those are some of the innovative approaches that we've seen to drive innovation in the supply community. Just as an example, I've been witnessed some hackathons. I don't know if you use them here. They're a fantastic way of driving innovation. So I guess really from me, I looked at the stats in your SME market versus Wales, okay? So you can't even compare our population with yours. But actually, SME percentage employment is exactly the same, 60%. 60% of your employment figures come from SMEs, and exactly the same for us. I think we're about 63. The difference is in our country, 95% of businesses are SMEs, okay? So that's a really important sector for us. So if we're really serious about innovation and we're really serious about doing things differently, the innovation for you is really about targeting and ensuring that SMEs are seen as fair on competitive when it comes to the tendering process. So I think that's really it. Be courageous, and I wish you good luck on that one. Thank you. Thank you.
If we could just have that last slide, please. On Prof, read that under be courageous, please.
I don't have to read it. Diolch yn fawr am rando. It means thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not going to try for now to say that, but certainly thank you so much, Professor, for a wonderful lecture. Much indeed appreciated. And thank you for offering those remarks. I would say it in your language, but you know the inherent challenge I might have. On the virtual platform, here's been ready and waiting. What is the state of current supply chains? Let me not delay any more time. Professor Handfield, on the virtual platform, the platform is yours. Welcome to South Africa, sir. Please unmute, of course. Prof, please unmute. Robert, unmute.
Go. Thank you so much. My apologies. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you here virtually. I'm sorry I was not able to be there in person today, but I really enjoyed that last lecture from Jane and her insights on public procurement and innovation. I've been working in the world of procurement for roughly 30 or more years. We have a center at North Carolina State called the Supply Chain Resource Cooperative, and we work a lot with a number of different organizations across the world, both private sector and public sector. And we really believe in the motto, think and do. So students work actively with these companies as part of the course curriculum. In terms of public procurement, I've had a number of personal experiences. I've worked with in the United States with the General Services Administration as a consultant. I've also worked with the Veterans Affairs. I've worked with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And during COVID, I worked with a group called the Joint Acquisition Task Force. And as part of that effort, I was involved in helping to secure PPE for the country at a time when there were massive shortages. Since then, I've been frequently interviewed for different New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and many other media. And generally, it's because procurement is now in the spotlight. Because of the massive shortages that we've had, it's become very problematic. I also launched an effort called the Ethical Apparel Index. And the goal of this is to identify all of the different procurement supply chain audits of apparel factories. And essentially, we're able to digitize them and boil them down into 3 very simple questions that we're putting onto a QR code that ideally would be put on a garment. And those 3 questions are workers treated fairly? Is the factory free from child labor, forced labor, discrimination? Are workers provided with a safe environment, and are workers paid fairly? And so this is a big project that is a 3-year grant from the Templeton Charitable Foundation that I think has become very important. With regards to public procurement and supply chains, we also have a book I wrote with a co-author, Tom Linton, and it's simply called Flow, How the Best Supply Chains Thrive. And this includes observations from my experience during COVID, as well as the ensuing 2 years. And the fact is that many of our supply chains are stuck. Procurement is often, blamed for this, but very often there have been massive shortages of not just healthcare supplies, but even raw materials of manufactured goods. I recall personally ordering a refrigerator and having to wait more than 8 months to have it delivered because of the shortages that were going on. So this is problematic everywhere. It's not just in one country. It's a global supply chain problem. And in Flow, we try to address that simple question of how do we get our supply chains to flow again, as they did before COVID. I also like to talk about an analogy from a book I read recently. It's called A World Lit Only by Fire. And it really sort of depicts what life was like during the medieval times. And you're asking yourself, why is he talking about this? Well, in the medieval times, people could not even leave their villages because they would get lost. There were no maps. There was no news. So you had no idea of what was going on in the world around you, if there were wars or if kingdoms had changed or what have you. And you were often very suspicious of new people coming in, and you didn't trust them. And then suddenly, you had the Renaissance, which came, and Michelangelo, for instance, performed autopsies to better understand human muscular forms. Galileo observed the movements of the sun and the stars, and it deduced the Earth was indeed not the center of the universe. And we started to really see enlightenment. So I would posit today, I would put it to you that in terms of our supply chain visibility and transparency, we are really in the medieval age. We haven't even yet begun to tap into the technologies that are going to be able to be at our disposal, both in terms of generative artificial intelligence, supply chain visibility, supply chain transparency. We're still in the medieval age. And for instance, I'm on a committee sponsored by the ASTM on supply chain standards. And I can tell you, we don't even have standard terminology now to be able to understand different types of activities going on. So I believe that we're really at the early stages of a renaissance of supply chain technology, which will be coming along shortly. One of the things that we have also seen since COVID are multiple shortages, multiple problems in supply chains globally. Everything from semiconductors to aluminum, to the climate change is causing problems with the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, and the plastic shortages and hurricanes. The invasion of the Ukraine, the invasion of Gaza Strip. So these are real events that are causing all kinds of problems. And when people ask me, well, why are supply chains so screwed up today? I tell them that there isn't a single reason. It's almost a cacophony of different events that have occurred simultaneously. So certainly climate change is a big factor. And we saw in particular the polar vortex that hit in the United States, the state of Texas, and it shut down all of the production of resins, all the production of all the petrochemical facilities, and that caused massive shortages everywhere else. We've seen delayed capital investments prior to COVID, for instance, in the semiconductor industry, which has caused a lot of shortages. And those have ripple effects, of course. They impact the automotive sector. They impact the electronic sector. And so we've seen this ripple effect because everything today is electrified. Everything today relies on semiconductors. Shortages in those semiconductors can delay production. And people sometimes forget in procurement, you only need one part not to show up, and it can shut down a manufacturing line. It can make it a product unavailable, and it can be a real problem. Transportation issues were problematic last year. They've come down quite a bit since then. We are also seeing shortages of truck drivers, port congestion. Inflation, we've seen massive increases in commodity costs. We've seen labor rate increases go up significantly. So all of these things have come together in a fashion so that the variety and volume of bottlenecks that we're seeing in the supply chain went up significantly during 2022. They're starting to come down in 2023. They're getting better. And I like to tell people they're getting better slowly. So you can see here that there is definitely improvement in the number of shortages of labor and shortages of material and shortages of transportation. But they're still well above the levels that they were in 2018, which means they're getting better, but we're still seeing problems everywhere. And this is, of course, affecting public procurement because procurement people, again, we rely on private sector organizations for everything from air conditioning units to healthcare goods to everything else. So one of the other big problems, I believe, for Africa today is around vaccines. And we saw this as a significant healthcare and public procurement issue during COVID. And, what we saw, I think, initially was there was a big push to deploy vaccines that required materials that were established by scientists in the research and development phase. But yet when it came to commercial production, they were simply unavailable. And this resulted in processing capacity that created massive bottlenecks, not just in clinical trials, but in commercialization. And many of the complexities associated with manufacturing and other vaccines inputs were the problem. And the problem, as we can express it today in supply chains, is that supply chains are composed of multiple tiers. And they're not really changed. They're more like networks. And you can see that any blockage, any disruption anywhere along that multi-tier network can cause a problem. And so, for instance, most organizations, if you look at their tier one suppliers, tier one being their immediate suppliers, they generally, most of the time, know who they are. So they have maybe 75% visibility and therefore are able to gauge risk fairly well. The deeper you go into these supply chains, the deeper you go to tier two, your visibility goes down. Most organizations have no idea who is in their second tier, the supplier to their suppliers. And then when you go even further down, deeper into your supply chain or your tier three, your visibility becomes almost non-existent. And very, very often that's where the risks are occurring. And these risks can be massive because they include things like mergers and acquisitions, tariffs, labor strikes. We worked with an organization, Resilink, and we identified, well, what are the major sources of disruption? And believe it or not, the number one reason is factory fires. Factory fires seem to cause massive disruptions. A simple fire can really destroy a tier two or tier three supplier and shut down your entire supply chain. Mergers and acquisitions, factory disruptions, leadership transitions. You can see here the list goes on and on. So there's no shortage of these different types of problems that are causing these massive disruptions in the supply chain. Well, what can we do about that? What are some of the things that we can be done? Well, I don't think we're here to solve the world's problems. We're not going to be able to, stop disruption from happening. But what we can do is start to understand where are these bottlenecks and understanding them. So if I go back to the case example of the vaccine, I was in a consortium held by the World Health Organization that had all of the major vaccine providers and manufacturers there and contract manufacturers. So simply understanding who is in your supply chain is a good start. And when we did this, we found, for instance, that as you started mapping out the actual production of these vaccines, you could start to identify the different processes involved in that. And as you identified the processes, you identified the materials that were likely going to be in short supply. And you also were able to understand where there were capacity bottlenecks, where there were licensing issues, Believe it or not, something as simple as tubing, plastic tubing was in short supply during COVID and actually significantly impeded the volume of vaccine production. And what we propose to the World Health Organization is the only thing that can help in these instances is data. We need visibility to these kinds of things. And so we need public procurement organizations to come together and work with the private sector to create these global visibility dashboards. Sometimes they can be supported by third parties like the World Health Organization, World Trade Organization. But there needs to be incentives for people to be able to share this data. And when we're able to do this, I believe we're going to have not only greater visibility, but we'll also be able to better map out where the problems are and where capacity needs to be added. In this case, it could be in bioreactors or in cell culture media. Filters were a big problem. So putting in measures to address these shortages are important. But again, it's without that visibility, we can't even manage these disruptions. We can't even begin to address them. I'll finish up with just a thought here. I believe that this is really an exciting time for Africa. This is, as the UNCTAD Secretary General Rebecca Greenspan said, it's Africa's moment, right? And given all of the areas that the continent has in terms of not just raw materials, critical materials, but also vital components that serve technology intensive industries. It's an opportunity to diversify, to invest, to build domestic capabilities in these areas. And I believe as we do that, we will also help draw investments in healthcare, investments in infrastructure and communities, in talent, and can definitely help with many of the challenges that we see today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much, Professor Rob Hanfield, Bank of America University, Distinguished Professor of Supply Chain Management, North Carolina State University on the East Coast of the US. Thanks, Prof. Do stay on the line, please, for immediately after this presentation that follows yours. There shall be a question and answer session with members who are both online as you are, as well as those in the audience. For now, again, I welcome on the stage Dr. Anita Ramusaran, Manager, Innovation for Inclusive Development at the Technology Innovation Agency of South Africa, to offer further insights in the benchmarking, technology, innovation, and public procurement. Anita, thank you so much for your time, ma'am. Great to have you back.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm actually delivering this address on behalf of the TIA CEO. He does apologize, he could not make it. Sorry, I come from TIA, but I don't know how to use the technology. What am I supposed to do here? Is it this one? Okay. Yes, so, oops, I didn't realize I should have had my laptop here. So I'm going to do this. Okay, so that's a bit too small, sorry. Okay, so in terms, no, it's fine. Thanks, Program Director, I'm good. So in terms of the policy context, I think I must say that this was a policy instrument from the Department of Science and Innovation, and we work very closely with the department, particularly Dr. Masaya that's sitting in our audience. And the program that we delivered is embedded within the white paper on science and technology, particularly policy intent 4.5 regarding the use of public procurement as a vehicle to further innovation. And 4.13 is to strengthen government's role as an enabler for innovation. These policy intents alludes to strategies that should be developed to ensure that government is the first customer when it comes to locally developed technologies. And as I explained earlier, it was very important that government intervenes at that stage, that it did intervene to be the first acquirer of the technology. Further, the policy is endorsing or reinforcing a cabinet resolution that was passed where it was mandated for DSI to explore and implement a policy instrument and strategies to enable exploitation and uptake of locally developed technologies to improve service delivery and enable transitioning to the knowledge economy. And government's infrastructure bill program is an example of such a program where locally developed technologies could be supported and tested. However, a supportive legislative environment was required to ensure the success of industry development efforts towards locally producing technology products in the field of, for an example, medical devices, ICT, and environmental strategies. And all of these depend on government's procurement process being open to innovation and products from technology SMEs and social and local innovators. And in order to create an open and responsive policy environment to realize these objectives, the DSI has set up the Technology Acquisition and Deployment Fund as a policy instrument, which is a broader strategy to support the deployment and commercialization of locally developed technologies. And TIA has been tasked to develop the funding instrument and to implement the program. Now, in terms of the international benchmarks, and the previous speakers did speak about the UK example, I want to reinforce some of the other examples. When we developed the program, we looked at several developed and emerging economies that use the approach to successfully launch new technologies in the market through the procurement process. And the instrument in many countries is referred to as the Small Business Innovation and Research Program, the SBIR program. In the US, the SBIR program is the most well-known program and model for utilizing government spend to stimulate technology innovation and acquisition deployment. The SBIR is a legislative instrument established through the Small Business Innovation Research Act. And you can see from the date, 1982, so long past, and it directs federal governments to set aside an annual budget for innovation. And the federal governments had to set aside at least 2.8% of their budget to support the development of innovative solutions by SMEs. So this is slightly different from our discussion today because this is asking government to set aside a budget for innovation. Not necessarily procurement, but to set aside a budget for innovation, inclusive of procurement. In Australia, the government of Queensland also established the SBR program, largely modeled around the UK program, with the stated objective to fund the research and development of innovative solutions for the Queensland government challenges. The program that is closest to what we've developed in South Africa is the one from India, and India's program is called the Technology Acquisition and Development Fund. So part of India's program does reserve part of the budget for developing technologies. In our case, in South Africa, we're calling it the Technology Acquisition and Deployment Fund. And a necessary requirement of this fund is that the technologies must be ready for deployment, whereas India will reserve a small portion of its budget for the development. It was launched in 2015 by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and it is the closest that we have to South Africa. The fund was established as a specialized scheme to facilitate the acquisition of clean, green energy solutions available for both the Indian market and globally by SMEs across various sectors to bridge the technology gap at an affordable cost. And in the UK, it's similar to the US, the SBIR program aims to position government as a lead customer for technological solutions, products or services by means of a competitive, a kind of two-stage competitive process that they developed. Now in the US, and I don't know whether I should spend time because I think Professor spoke earlier about the US program and what the instrument does. So I won't spend much time talking about that. I would rather move to the Indian Technology Acquisition and Deployment Fund, which I mentioned was launched in 2015, and we built it along our model. The scheme of that is being managed by the Global Innovation and Technology Alliance, which is a non-profit joint venture PPP between the Department of Science and Technology in India and the Confederation of Indian Industry. So there's a strong backing from business if you see the way they constituted. And the fund actually has 4 instruments. It provides direct support for technology acquisition to reimburse to the value of 50% of technology transfer costs. It also has an indirect support for technology acquisition through a patent pool sourced locally or through global markets, and licensed selected SMMEs with a subsidy to the value of 50%. So what this means is that there's a patent pool for particular technologies, and these are made available to SMMEs so that they could license it to government departments that needs it. There is subsidy for up to 10% of manufacturing for a new plant, machinery or devices for controlling certain areas, technology areas like pollution, energy efficiency, and water conservation. And there's an incentive scheme for green manufacturing that aims to facilitate conservation activities in industries located within the manufacturing sector. These are some of the examples of public procurement initiatives in the South African space. We have the National Industrial Participation Scheme. We've had various other open innovation platforms. There's a unit sitting at CSR called the Technology Localization Program, where we use local technologies for high infrastructure project, various enterprise supplier programs by industry, which provides SMMEs with post-revenue support, but not for startups. So the TADF, what I will elaborate more on, is a buying or a purchase or an offtake instrument for new innovative technology products, and it could include pre-revenue startups. So you'd find that startups that we take in may not be in sales, may not be set up for long periods of time, and these are the ones that come into our program. So in the South African context, the TADF, the Technology Acquisition and Deployment Fund, has been set up to promote locally developed products and innovations by the public sector. And this is targeting government departments, municipalities, and public entities. And it is believed by the department and TIA that such acquisition will actually encourage long-term offtake agreements between technology development and the user client department, which is the municipality or the government department. It is also envisaged that the acquisition process shall provide opportunities for exploiting local innovation to improve public entity operations, enhance their service delivery, and to address persistent and economic challenges, socioeconomic challenges. I did mention that we did set up the fund, and I did mention the work that TIA does. And TIA's role is also in the latter part of the technology exploitation process, which is around commercialization. And we have suffered in this area for many reasons. One of them being low or no uptake of these innovations by the public sector. So TIA funds both from a technology push level as well as a market pull level. And in many cases in the technology push, where technologies are being developed and markets are being sought, we do find that there is low levels of uptake of these innovations by the public sector. And some of these could be a non-existent conducive policy environment to promote the acquisition and deployment of these technologies. And sometimes the innovative user specification requirements are so complex where innovations that don't have a track record in the market or requires pre-commercialization support to enter the market are actually excluded. I think I've mentioned that in my previous, in a panel discussion. Now, the way we've structured the technology acquisition and deployment, we work with 4 modes. The first mode is a market push mode, where the innovator applies to the technology acquisition and deployment fund, and they provide a technology solution for a client that they have identified who has a challenge or a need. So an innovator will come to us to say they've identified the Department of Basic Education that needs a particular solution. And this is the solution they have. They'd want to supply it. They provide us with what we call a user client letter of intent, where the department indicates that this is what they actually require. The second mode is what we call the market pull approach. Here is the user is the applicant. So the municipality could come to us or the government department. And I was explaining to the lady from the Department of Health earlier that we did get a request from the Department of Health in Gauteng to provide technologies. So a department can come to us to say, we do need technology solutions. And they also have identified an innovator for the technology solution and would want us to acquire and pilot so that they would be able to buy that. Mode 3 is a market pull approach also, where the client or the user is the applicant with a challenge and requires a technology solution, but hasn't identified the innovator. So here it would be a government department coming out to say, this is the problem we have, but we don't know who is innovating in this area. Can you release a call and innovate for innovators to come and solve this problem for us? And the last mode is where the SMME is the applicant for an acquisition, for the acquisition of a technology they have identified by a university or a science council. So CSIR may have a technology and you as an SMME may have identified that and you want to roll it out in a government department. So it's about accessing a technology from a higher education institution or a science council. Now, in terms of the long-term strategy, and this was actually before this conference, and I'm going to have to add to this because we had a very interesting panel discussion before. But the intent is that this instrument will be deployed as a national risk procurement lever, an instrument for locally developed technologies and products adopted and approved by National Treasury. So we're hoping to get to that stage. And could be a facility could be as a soft loan. At the moment, we offer the facility as a grant, but if we could look at long-term offering it as a soft loan. TIA has, and the 4 modes of implementation I spoke about. So TADF, we hope will be adopted by National Treasury as a framework and for rollout. The TADF to be adopted also by government departments, municipalities, and state-owned entities as a risk procurement fund or an instrument program. And the TADF shall be further capitalized by National Treasury with contributions from government departments, municipalities, and state entities' procurement budgets. So what we're asking for is that some capital investment from National Treasury in partnership with government departments, and the TADF will use technical specialists to assist acquisition and deployment and will disperse funds based on assurance certificates. So one of the things we've built into the program is to make sure that every step of the process of deployment, there is an assurance process where we can assure that the technology is not at the risk of failure, that there is community buy-in, there's proper community facilitation that has happened, especially if the technology has to be deployed in communities. We piloted the program with 18 technologies. And if you see on the extreme right, some of the municipalities where these technologies are actually being piloted. And you can see that there are a range of municipalities across the country that are piloting. Of these 18 technologies, 10 of them actually have come from a grassroots innovation program that we also implement. So these are technologies where innovators have come to us with just the idea or the proof of concept. And we've taken them and developed the technologies. And these technologies are community-facing service delivery technologies, which we've taken into this program for them to deploy at various departments. I just want to speak about a few of them, just to give you some context in terms of the kinds of technology that we are developing. This is Viacom, and it's video remote interpreting. So Jabo Blosede is a deaf. He's hearing impaired, so he's deaf. And he's developed this technology where he provides these services at a police station. So if there is a person who is hearing impaired and has been abused, how does she give her statement to a police official who does not understand sign language? So what happens is this person is connected through video remote to a call center with live interpreters who will interpret, who will assist in taking down the statement. So this technology is being deployed here in Pretoria at the Brooklyn Police Station, and the intent is that we will roll it out in every police station in the country using this technology. The next one is Momesa Community Safety Technology. And this technology is where it's also with SAPS, but it is a technology where you have cameras in communities that will report crime, safety. So it's a safety, and the reporting happens directly at the police station. So in partnership with the government department, which is the SAPS, this is how this technology is being deployed. And this is a technology that's being deployed here in the city of Joburg, Joburg Waters. And this is what we call, it's Prevleak, but it's a smart manhole cover. So it will be able to detect when there's overflow of water, sanitation, etc. And this is currently being deployed at the city of Joburg. Now, what we've been observing, and this is an important point regarding this conference, what we've been observing is in departments where there is an innovation program, like the city of Joburg has an innovation program, it's easier for them to onboard technologies, to pilot and then take it into their systems, right? Because what they've done is they set aside an innovation budget. And they're using the innovation process to actually procure the technology and to pilot the technology. We've seen it at the city of Joburg, and we've seen it in Tshwane as well. Both of these have been taking our grassroots technologies and deploying them. Moonshine, this is a technology where the Road Accident Fund has actually bought and deployed these technologies. So this is a paint, reflective paint that is sprayed on animals, non-toxic, and it enables drivers to make sure that they don't knock these animals in very rural areas. So this is also Memphis. He's one of our youth grassroots innovators who came up with this technology. Road Accident Fund is actually now a client that is deploying his technology. Yes, so that is the presentation. So in a nutshell, we've learned from some examples internationally, and we are implementing this program at a pilot stage, hoping that we'll be able to intervene at the level of the ground with municipalities, but hoping that we can go higher into intervening at the level of National Treasury. Thank you for your kind attention.
We need a lot of moonshine in the roads of the Eastern Cape. That I can assure you. There's a stretch of the N2, especially between Butterworth and on the other side of Mthatha. It's known as quite easily the most dangerous stretch of road in the country. Can you imagine what moonshine would do there? It obviously wouldn't mitigate driver behavior, but certainly it could make a meaningful impact. And that's an important use of illustrations of how technology, when in an environment where it is well received, can have direct consequences. And I mean, I was just minded to reflect on a conversation I was having once with the Vodacom CEO, how they use technology for the public good. For instance, they would deploy technology on a pipeline of water. At regular intervals, they have this, I'm going to call it a chip for lack of a better term, that measures the rate of speed of the water flow. And if between points A and B, there's a sudden drop between points, if between points A and B, this is the speed, and between B and C, the speed is different, they know between points B and C that there's a problem. So in other words, they don't spend a lot of time and money digging to try and find. They know exactly where more or less the marker is. So PrevLeak is just an example of how perhaps there could even be a partnership in the PPP context in relation to all of that. So these are just fascinating examples and wonderful presentations as well from Professors Lynch and Hanfield, as well as Dr. Ramusaran. Of course, there would be questions, and I anticipate there would be. Who wants to be number one? Khio. Number two? Shope. Number three? Ma'am. Number three, number four? We have one, we have two, we have three. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more. 5 on the virtual platform. Thank you so much. Are there any more? Going once? Going twice? Sean, you'll be the last speaker. Thank you very much. Prof. Khio.
Thank you very much. So I've got a question for each one of you. Anita, I've got a million questions for you, but I'm going to try and restrict myself to one. We could continue this conversation offline. Jane, I've got a question for you around capacity building. So you've placed a lot of emphasis on that. And I'll be quite interested to just get your really recommendation on if we were to do capacity building around shifting procurement in the direction that we've been speaking in all these conversations, right? Innovation, strategic, et cetera, et cetera. Firstly, where would you start, right? So where would you, the first entry point, because obviously one can't do it across the board. So what would be your first entry point in terms of that entire workforce? And then secondly, I think flowing from that, what would you start with? What would be the type of content, topic, what thing do you think should one start with? So that's my question to you. Robert, my question to you is, you've spoken a lot about the supply chains and how important it is to create robust supply chains and what we've learned over the last few years. I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on the interaction between strengthening supply chains, and I'm specifically thinking here about public supply chains, making them more robust on the one hand and localization on the other, especially when in the topic that we are focusing on, really favoring local innovative solutions, whether that's process solutions or actually content, and whether you think there's a relationship between those two. I'll be very interested to hear your thoughts on that. Anita, yeah, as I say, I've got absolutely a million questions. So let me just quickly see which one I would want to focus on. Let me ask you this one. So there's a lot of initiatives seemingly going on under the broad DSI umbrella, but it seems to me also beyond that in other places. So I'll be very keen to hear whether there's been any thought given by TIA, DSI, any of the other agencies in that portfolio on measuring impact across the system of different interventions aimed at getting procurement to support innovation. Has there been any thought given to, can we try and see what is working on a systemic basis? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you to both of you. That was really, really good. Thank you. So my question for Jane, I wanted to ask that, do you think that having, say, robust procurement planning frameworks can be an avenue for really integrating innovation into procurement? Because I feel like that's sort of like an, low-hanging fruit, if you like. And what do you think that should look like? And for Anita, thank you again. As you were talking, I was just thinking about how much work you guys are doing. And I wanted to ask that how much of, say, cooperation, awareness raising is done between TIA and, your ecosystem, the innovative companies, procuring entities, right down to local level, national treasury. Do you feel like you're doing enough to actually build awareness of what you have to offer and how you can bridge, the gaps, or build bridges between these different parts of our innovation ecosystem, if you like?
We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After number 2, please go 3, please go 4, please go 5.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you to the presenters for the...
Please, could you speak into the mic, ma'am?
Yes, thank you. Oops, I have to sit closer. The spike seems to be a bit too far for me. Okay. Just thank you to the presenters for the insights that you have shared. My question is for Anita. There are a number of digital systems which you were involved in the development of, piloting, implementation down the line, etc. And I'm sorry to the audience if I'm going to bring up a swear word, but I just wanted to know what the role of CETA was in A, the development, and B, the procurement of the solution by the departments down the line. Thank you.
Oh, gave me a fright there with that swear word. 4. Number 4.
Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies. Thanks to all the presenters. My question is going to touch on almost aspects that we discussed today. Is it better now? Yeah?
So don't worry about me. Please continue with the question.
Oh,
We can
sorry.
hear you. Yeah.
I think we all agree that public procurement is all about inclusivity. We need to give everyone a chance, given the technologies and the services that one can provide. And I think we can also agree that as a nation, we mainly adopters of innovation and technology. I mean, hence, we do not have our own aircraft. We don't have our own standards that we can certify the vehicles or weapon system. What is the DTI, National Treasury, and T are doing about it? Where are we cutting ties with the treaties that we have signed with other nations in terms of the technologies that we develop? I'd like to piggyback on the gentleman's word that there's intellectual property, there's patents that are attached to some of these systems. At what point do we cut ties and say we're going to own up our systems and be able to generate or produce such within the country? Thank you.
Question for Anita. Is the TIA's program a funding program? I think it's a funding of innovation program, or is it a procurement of innovation program? And what's the difference? And maybe Rob and Jane can potentially help out as well with that question.
Rob, did you get that last contribution? Because your perspectives are sought there. Did you get that?
Yes, I did. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Do you want to start off, Rob, now that at least you and I are engaging, and that question in part you will have to answer? Go for it, Rob.
Yeah, sure. And thank you everyone for the questions. I think they were really valuable. I guess the first question was with respect to public supply chains and localization. And I would say that we are definitely seeing organizations starting to develop local content, and we observed this, during COVID, where there were a lot of local providers that also started to produce masks and gowns, etc. Unfortunately, and this is really where I think the role of public procurement comes into play. Once COVID is over, then everyone sort of reverted back to global supply chains, primarily sourcing from China. And, that's how we got into this problem in the first place, is relying on global sources without proper, definition of local sources. And so I believe that wherever possible, we should be looking for at least some type of local supply, and not just distributors, but actually manufacturers who are domestically located. And I think the role of government will be to support those industries by having a minimum percentage from a domestic or local source. There are some supply chains that simply cannot be localized. For instance, semiconductors. Trying to build a domestic semiconductor industry is something I know the US is trying to do, but it's almost impossible to do because you need the entire supply chain. You can't just build a fab. Likewise, there are certain components that are produced in Asia, which are not likely to be sourced domestically. But I do encourage public procurement people to really consider development of domestic and local sources whenever possible, or at least within the continent of Africa, to be able to make it available. The second question, I believe, was related to innovation. I think encouraging innovation in public procurement is not something that we typically do. Typically, we get statements of work and specifications and SLAs and go out there and just source them. But I think, as we start to look at the nature of the problems that procurement is being asked to source, we're getting more of the functional requirements. And this will encourage us to start working with suppliers to better help them understand what are the possibilities out there. So that's just a thought that I have at the moment.
Thought-provoking nonetheless. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Rob. Let's go to you, Professor Lynch.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for the questions. I think they're huge questions, actually. But the first one I'm going to refer to is the capacity building one. I think that's a really important point to make. And we've just finished a 3-year project called Infuse. It stands for Innovative Future Public Services. And actually, the intention and the business plan for Infuse was all around capacity building. there's an assumption that every single public sector body has a procurement team, and what's more, a skilled procurement team who know exactly what they're doing and are experts in every area. We all know that's an impossible scenario wherever you are in the world, however great you think you are. The reality is that there's an imbalance in terms of capacity, capability, skills that happen within each of the public bodies. So there were two approaches that we've taken to try and address that, and I think both of them have been quite successful. Initially, we looked at delivering procurement session, raising the profile of procurement. So the research is very thick, telling you about how you elevate the role of strategic procurement across the organisation, and how you have it understood as being, I've heard it being called a lever, but I heard it being called an octopus the other day. I think it's a much better term. Is that you use the tentacles as you need them. Yeah, I think it's fun. It's a bit of fun. But I think the point is a serious one, because, through procurement, I heard your spending figures, that's staggering, isn't it? Imagine that you're impacting your local communities through that spend directly. Now we're talking about some real change that you can implement here in South Africa, and and South Africa deserves it. Okay, I've been here many times, and I absolutely love my visits. But I'm frustrated like you are sometimes, and it'd be great to see the change. And I do see that procurement is the vehicle to make some of that change positively. So the way that we did it is that we designed a series of procurement labs. The basics, we didn't put too much jargon in there, but we tried to think about outcomes. What are we trying to achieve through procurement other than just buying goods and services? How can we benefit? We'll go back to that local sourcing example that Robert has just been talking about here. We call it in South Wales, we call it the leaky bucket syndrome, okay? So you're using procurement spend to buy goods and services. If you use that spend in the local community, then it gets reinvested, and there's your social return on investment. It doesn't take much to realize and work that out. Every time you use that spend elsewhere, the money leaks out. So imagine, for every rand that you're spending, if that money is being reinvested into the local supply chain, trying to get that message across to non-procurement professionals was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Once they understand that concept, they get why procurement's important. So that's exactly what we've been doing for 3 years, is delivering procurement labs over a 5-week period, and asking them to work on collaborative experiments around procurement and how their individual roles can help them to address procurement. So that's one way. And the other way is we have champions. Some people are just generally very skilled at procurement. And the first person I went to, I can think of this person in my head straight away and think, well, I had this conversation first of all by email, and he completely ignored me. And then I kept emailing. I said, right, we need to have a chat about something. And I said, right, we need to think about using your expertise and how you can share that expertise, share the love, and you can help build the capacity with other procurement departments. And that's exactly what's happened 18 months later. Initially said, no, there's no way I'm going to be doing that. And blow me down, I was called to a strategic meeting, and 4 of the municipalities are actually now collaborating through procurement, not across the board, but in particular categories of spend. So those are the 2 ways that we're addressing capacity. It's about sharing, it's about collaborating across body, across organizations, but also about elevating the role of procurement across the organization by making people aware of what is possible through procurement. So I hope that helps to address that first question. I could go on to that one forever, but I'll stop there. And then we talk about frameworks. I think this is a fantastic question, because the conversations that I have at the moment with government officials, not just in Wales, is to framework or not to framework, okay? The advantages of a framework is that it brings massive opportunity to small businesses. This is their opportunity to be part of procurement, when perhaps if it was just a direct purchase, or it was a normal tender process, maybe they would be excluded on the basis of turnover. When we put out a prior identification notice, a PIN notice, and say that actually in 12 months' time, we're going to be putting out a framework for food, is a good example. Food in Wales is very fragmented. We have a lot of micro firms, and we know that they're producing fantastic quality produce, which can have a direct impact on the health of the local community. But what are we doing? Sourcing our food from outside. So not only are we adding our carbon footprint, where the food is deteriorating in terms of its nourishing abilities, it makes so much more sense to work with our local suppliers on that. So that's exactly what we're looking at. So the framework gives an opportunity for those businesses to be part of the procurement opportunity. It's also a learning opportunity for them. The downside of it is that just because they're on a framework doesn't necessarily mean that they get a contract. And that can sometimes be very frustrating. And this is where we are at the moment. There is no answer to this one, but I would say, and the other issue around frameworks and challenge around frameworks is that a framework comes around every 3 years or 4 years. So once you're stuck into being the preferred supplier for this particular framework, I think the other challenge with frameworks is the suppliers don't know how to get on board. Because if they've missed it, and it's not happening for another 4 years, then it can be very frustrating. But in fact, I was exhibiting and gave a keynote at ProcureX, a procurement exhibition, and I spent most of the day talking to suppliers about how to get onto a framework. And so, do you have an online platform, for example? So in Wales, we have something called Sell to Wales. All contracts over a certain value have to be advertised on that platform. In the UK, it's Contracts Finder. And that makes it an equal and fair opportunity for everybody. But first of all, they need to know about that. So we have business support agencies in Wales. We don't have so many good ones in England, that will actually spend all of their time and effort signposting suppliers towards those platforms, those digital platforms, so that they can be aware when these opportunities are coming up. But equally, I know that a lot of municipalities, local authorities are putting a lot of effort in. Sorry, stop. Did say I got a lot to say. Yeah, so I think that, it's a really good question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I asked earlier, it's working, thanks. I asked earlier if it's just the point I walk out of the room because I did agree to present on behalf of the CEO, but I hope I can represent the organization in responding. So Prof. Keo, the first question you asked about whether there was measuring of impact on the system on getting procurement to support innovation. Right, so we've not observed much of that. There was just a program implemented by the DSI. It's now morphed into another program, which is the validation and verification of innovation for service delivery. It started off as the IP RVP program, which was Innovations for Rural Development Program. So there we have some data, some impact, but the whole initiative around this public, the TADF was actually emanated from the fact that we had a lot of our innovators that are not able to get into systems. And I like the idea of the procurement labs, and I think it could work in our South African case, because what we have, and these are tier structures, we have living labs and we have technology stations. So they are well set up, credible expertise, etc. If innovators can be incubated there, and if there is a tender process out, you apply as an institution with a whole lot of SMMEs that you have under your umbrella, that could be a potential way into the system. But currently, and that was the question, the last question that was asked online, is tier funding innovation, or are we procuring innovation? And I want to just draw a distinction between the two, and explain what we follow as tier. So as tier, we have what we call an innovation process and a procurement process. Where there are goods and services required, we follow a SEM process. Where there's innovation required, we'll follow an innovation process. Now, we did that for COVID. During COVID, we provided low-cost ventilators through an innovation process. And we were able to distribute these low-cost innovators at rural clinics. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yes, so through an innovation process, we were able to distribute to to communities, sanitizers, masks, etc., all through not a procurement process, but an innovation process. And we're observing these things happening with, like the municipalities I've mentioned earlier. To the question from regarding CETA, we did try to get CETA on board in our advisory board. So we do have an advisory board. It hasn't taken off as we anticipated. We do have National Treasury, the DPME in the advisory board, but that didn't take off as anticipated. We also have the State-Owned Procurement Forum on the board. We hope to actually revive that advisory board so that we can get some traction. But what we have got traction is the implementation on the ground with regards to these innovators. So we're intervening at both levels, at the grassroots level as well as at the policy level with regards to that. So unfortunately, we haven't been that successful. We've pushed a lot of our efforts into making sure that we put the technologies out there, we get the user clients onboarded, and we get to learn lessons from the way it's being currently managed. With regards to your question, ma'am, about the awareness raising, and how do we build bridges with the different parts? Yes, so our role is also as a facilitator, as a coordinator in the ecosystem, and particularly as we've been through a review, a ministerial review, and one of the key findings of the review, which is going to enable us to move into what we call TIA 2.0, is that TIA should be acting as should be playing a curatorship role in the ecosystem. In other words, we should be at a level where we would be building the ecosystem, but defining the agenda, assisting with the standards, assisting with the regulations, assisting with the innovation process, etc. So definitely it is the work, but our the innovation ecosystem is also very well developed in some areas, like Gauteng and the Western Cape, underdeveloped in most other provinces. So it's a lot of work that has to happen, particularly from the units that we work in inclusive innovation, a lot of community-facing work. It really does require, a lot in terms of building that. So definitely it's on the cards, but it would require a lot of efforts to actually lead in the curatorship role. In terms of the question around the adopters of technology, and we don't have standards, I want to disagree with that, and I want to just use two examples. So the moonshine example I quoted earlier, his initial project was assisted by Northwest University, and they were using a Chinese supplier to make the beads. Apparently for the paint, I couldn't understand the technology, but I understood that the supply chain was a global supply chain, right? So and then there was problems with getting those supplies. So we have in TIA also what we call technology stations, and they are discipline specific. We have a chemical technology station with expertise and technology infrastructure at Mangosuthu University of Technology, and it's on chemicals. So they were able to actually re-engineer the process where he's able to now get it locally manufactured, local suppliers, and is able to supply local government. Right. So I think, and then of course we needed to look at the standards as well. So he went through the process with defining the standards, and that is also a critical thing in the country. We've recently engaged with the SABS, and the problem is that some of these technologies don't have standards written, and you need those standards to be written in order for the SABS to certify it. So they've asked for assistance to bring on board the expertise so that we could write these standards so that they could be made available, and then they could have the stamp of approval that is required. So, and then the COVID is another example where we were able to set standards and be able to deliver. In fact, I think in our response to COVID from the NSI side was actually remarkable in terms of what was happening globally. South Africa's response to COVID, mainly due to a lot of our systems in science and innovation. You all know that the Omicron virus, yes, was actually discovered by an intern that was at TIA's platform. Yes, and he's been trained by TIA, and so it's, yes, it was an intern that was in the tier process, or went through the tier process. But I think I want to just say, maybe I must end up by saying that we have to start somewhere, right? So we've been depending on global supply chains for everything, and then our innovators at the back end have not been able to get into the system. We need to start somewhere. Where do we start? Even if we help a small cohort of 18 that I showed on my slide, help them to bridge this gap, help them to get into procurement systems, and I'm sure there should be traction at some point. I have a few more years before retirement, so I hope that they will get their traction before I retire.
Well, I can guarantee you that I want to interview that intern, because the whole world spoke about Omicron, and not one of us in this room, not one person in this room, I dare say, knows the name of that intern. Anybody? Of course, you're at the NRF, sir. Naturally. But isn't that the point? I mean, there are so many good stories in this country. As you come up, Prof. Giokino, as well, this moonlight story, I mean, just the moonshine, I beg your pardon, moonshine. Yeah. The moonshine story is some cheap shots thrown, yeah? But I would imagine a conversation like that can't just end on this stage. The fact that this innovation has, first of all, cut out what is a local supply chain from the global supply chain, and the necessary developments that are taking place in other spaces. Look at, for instance, what it has forced from a standards perspective, and how SABS has to sort of move along with technology, spurred on by this innovation that without the interventions, at least for now we can say, of the TIA, we probably wouldn't have. Now, how many pockets in society have this talent, have this innovation that remains locked, for there remain little outlets? Or if the point is not there are little outlets, then it drives the point of Professor Williams when she asks, how much of this is readily available? Do people know these spaces actually exist? Because they are sitting on this innovation, they are sitting on this technology, they are sitting on this development. Nonetheless, many questions. Prof, it is up to you to round off, but not without doing what we do best here. Of course, that's your prerogative, and that's for Professor Jane Lynch. Rob, you're missing out on some of the finest wine from Stellenbosch here because you're not here in person. So what I will promise you is that when you are next in South Africa, you have to go and collect 6 bottles from Gio in Stellenbosch, not before a lecture to the law faculty's law students there.
I will do that. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof.
Cheers.
You take
Bye.
care. Thank you, ma'am. Wonderful. That was really, yeah. Oh, you guys are doing great work. Prof. Kino, the stage is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mbete. I just want to say, Anita, while you're finding your way back, so Gezu's been talking about the stretch of road where he comes from, where the animals are causing a problem. He needs the moonshine. Where I come from, we don't have so much problem with animals on the road, perhaps other type of animals. We call them cyclists. And I think we need to expand that technology so that we paint them as well, so that I don't run into them as I often do on a particular stretch of road where I am. So no, I don't almost often do. So I think there's another expansion for the technology there. Colleagues, I just want to wrap up. I'm not going to try and do anything substantive today. I'll try to say something tomorrow substantive as we close the conference. I just want to quickly wrap up to say thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you very much to all the speakers. I think we've had really rich engagements already at different levels, and I think that is really important. You'll remember in the opening remarks, one of our opening speakers in our welcome session made specific reference to that on the program, and that was by design. And I'm very pleased that we were able to have those conversations today. I promise you we will continue this tomorrow. So please, ladies and gentlemen, can I encourage you to please return tomorrow. Of course, that's always the test with any event. If you see the same people, bring a friend along. Because if you have a quick look at your program for tomorrow, we are in for, again, a great treat tomorrow on what's on the program. And we are starting tomorrow morning, the first two speakers on an absolute high. Professor Charles Edquist, you've heard him in action a little bit today. You didn't hear from me trying to convince you that you've got somebody on the program here that's the best. You heard it from one of our other speakers. So do not miss the opportunity tomorrow to firstly hear from Professor Charles Edquist and then immediately followed by Professor Louise Knight. Equally insightful, bringing very important perspectives to bear on what we are talking about today at this conference. So please do not miss that absolute treat where we start tomorrow, and then we'll have excellent further contributions during the rest of the day. I wish you safe travels, and I see all of you tomorrow here again. Thank you very much. Excellent. This was a top quality list of speakers. Yeah, that's great. This pulled out the big guns this time. Proper. What did the TIA create to do? Innovation. Why does nobody know about them? They come to us. Oh, someone to ask the question. Who are these guys? No, this project. Never heard of them. No, never heard of them before. I wrote here between the TIA and the Department of DSI, Treasury, OCPO, yourselves, and NRA. You could quite literally put together a POA, Program of Action, for innovation for public procurement. Just these four entities could run with it. But I'll sit down with the meeting that Ash, about 5 or 6 or 7. You just do things for them. Everyone will join the bandwagon.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you.
Excellent. Really, really good.
That memory trip down.
What was just
memory lane.
the?
I was just trying to wait.